Welcome to the Truth in Crime Case Files. Mildred Donovan seemed to have it all. At 38, she was the epitome of suburban success. Her home, nestled in a quiet, tree-lined street of Maple Grove, was a picture-perfect example of American domesticity. The white picket fence, the meticulously maintained garden, and the cozy, warmly lit interior all painted a portrait of a life many envied. But, as with many perfect pictures, the true story lay in the details, the hidden brushstrokes that only the most observant might notice. Mildred had always been a dreamer. From a young age, she found solace in books, disappearing into the worlds of romance and fantasy whenever the real world became too much. Her passion for storytelling led her to pursue a degree in literature, and after college, she married her college sweetheart, Jeffrey Donovan. They quickly settled into a comfortable routine. Jeffrey, a dedicated accountant, worked long hours, ensuring their financial stability, while Mildred took on the role of homemaker, maintaining the house, and attending various social events in their close-knit community. But beneath the surface, Mildred felt a gnawing emptiness. The dreams she had once harbored of becoming a renowned writer had been pushed aside, replaced by the demands of motherhood and marriage. The novels she had planned to write, the stories that had once flowed so effortlessly from her imagination, now lay dormant, gathering dust in the corners of her mind. As the years passed, Mildred's yearning for something more grew stronger. Her writing, once a source of joy, became a lifeline, an escape from the monotony of her daily life. She began working on a series of romance novels, pouring her unfulfilled desires and fantasies into the characters she created. The heroines in her stories were everything she wasn't: bold, adventurous, unafraid to chase their desires. They lived the lives she could only dream of, free from the constraints of domesticity. Jeffrey, though loving and supportive, had become distant over the years. The long hours he spent at work took a toll on their relationship. Their conversations became shorter, their intimacy less frequent. Mildred often found herself alone at night, her mind wandering to the characters she wrote about, wondering what it would be like to experience the passion and excitement she described in her books. It was during one of these lonely nights that Mildred stumbled upon an online writing community. It was a place where aspiring writers shared their work, exchanged ideas, and supported one another. Mildred quickly became an active member, posting excerpts from her novels and engaging with other writers. Among them was a young man named Paul Rivers, an aspiring novelist in his late 20s. Paul's writing was raw, passionate, and filled with the same longing that Mildred felt. They connected instantly, their conversations quickly moving from the public forums to private messages. Paul was different from anyone Mildred had ever met. He was intense, driven, and unafraid to explore the darker sides of desire. Their conversations grew more personal, more intimate, as they shared their deepest fantasies and fears. For Mildred, it was thrilling, a welcome escape from the confines of her life. Paul understood her in a way that Jeffrey never could, or at least, that's what she told herself. As the months passed, Mildred found herself thinking about Paul more and more. He was a constant presence in her mind, a shadow that followed her through her day-to-day routine. She began to withdraw from her friends, spending less time at social gatherings and more time in front of her computer. Her writing, once a mere hobby, became an obsession, a way to channel the emotions she couldn't express in real life. But as her connection with Paul deepened, so did her discontent with her own life. The more she indulged in her fantasies, the more she felt the weight of her reality. The perfect life she had built for herself began to feel like a prison, each day a reminder of the dreams she had sacrificed. Mildred knew she was playing with fire. She knew that her growing obsession with Paul was dangerous, that it threatened to unravel the life she had worked so hard to create. But she couldn't stop herself. The thrill of their secret conversations, the excitement of their shared fantasies, was too intoxicating to resist. And so, Mildred continued down the path she had chosen, unaware of the darkness that lay ahead. She was blind to the storm brewing just beyond the horizon, a storm that would soon tear apart the life she had so carefully constructed and leave a trail of destruction in its wake. The night had fallen quiet over Maple Grove, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. The Donovan household was no exception to the peaceful stillness. Jeffrey Donovan parked his car in the driveway, exhausted from another long day at work. He noticed the lights were still on, which was unusual for this late hour. Mildred usually turned in early, especially on weekdays. Jeffrey shrugged off the nagging feeling in his gut as just the result of too much stress and not enough sleep. He walked up the steps and unlocked the front door, calling out for Mildred as he entered. The house was eerily quiet, an unsettling silence that sent a shiver down his spine. Jeffrey's eyes darted around the living room. Mildred's favorite blanket was draped over the couch, and a half-empty cup of tea sat on the coffee table, still warm. It was as if she had just been there, but something felt off. As he approached the bedroom, Jeffrey pushed the door open cautiously and froze at the sight before him. Mildred lay sprawled on the bed, her body twisted in a grotesque position as if she had been thrown there. Her nightgown, once a soft pastel blue, was now soaked in blood. Blood was everywhere. It had splattered across the walls, pooled on the floor, and stained the once pristine white bedding. Jeffrey forced himself to move, his legs feeling like lead as he approached Mildred's body. He reached out with a trembling hand, barely able to bring himself to touch her. Her skin was cold, a stark reminder that she was truly gone. As Jeffrey stood there, numb and disoriented, he noticed something else. The drawer of Mildred's nightstand was open, its contents haphazardly spilled out. Among the scattered items, an old journal, a few loose papers, and a small box, was her cell phone, its screen cracked, as if it had been thrown or dropped in the struggle. Desperate for answers, Jeffrey picked up the phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely keep hold of it. He frantically tried to unlock it, but the screen remained unresponsive, the cracks distorting the image beneath. He cursed under his breath, the frustration and panic rising inside him. But then, something caught his eye, a small, blood-stained piece of paper partially tucked under the mattress. Jeffrey reached for it, pulling it free with trembling fingers. It was a note, hastily scrawled in Mildred's handwriting. The words were smeared with blood, making them difficult to read, but Jeffrey could make out a few fragmented phrases. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to happen," and "Paul." Jeffrey's mind raced as he tried to piece together what the note could mean. Who was Paul? And what had Mildred done that she felt she needed to apologize for? The questions swirled in his head, adding to the overwhelming sense of dread that threatened to consume him. The sound of a distant siren snapped Jeffrey back to reality. He had almost forgotten that he had called 911 in his panic. He could hear the faint wail of the approaching police cars and ambulances, growing louder by the second. Jeffrey stumbled out of the room, his legs barely able to carry him as he made his way downstairs to unlock the front door. He collapsed on the floor in the hallway, his back against the wall, as the first responders burst through the door moments later. "Sir, are you okay?" "What happened?" one of the officers asked, kneeling beside Jeffrey and trying to assess the situation. Jeffrey could only point weakly towards the stairs, his voice barely a whisper. "Upstairs, Mildred, she's..." The words caught in his throat, and he couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. The officers exchanged a glance before one of them hurried upstairs, followed closely by a paramedic team. The next few minutes were a blur for Jeffrey. He could hear the commotion upstairs, the shouts of the officers as they took in the crime scene, the hurried footsteps of the paramedics as they rushed to assess Mildred's condition, though deep down, Jeffrey knew it was already too late. The reality of Mildred's death began to settle in, wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. As he sat there in the hallway, his body trembling and his mind reeling, Jeffrey knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built a life with, was gone. And in her place was a mystery, a dark and terrifying enigma that he couldn't begin to understand. Mildred's life had ended in violence, and now Jeffrey's would be consumed by the search for answers. Who was Paul? What had driven Mildred to this point? And, most haunting of all, what had really happened in that bedroom on this tragic night? The answers would come, but not without a price. And as the night wore on, Jeffrey could only cling to the hope that he would find out the truth before it destroyed him, too. Detective Leslie Roberts arrived at the Donovan residence just before dawn, the early morning light casting long shadows across the eerily quiet street. The once peaceful suburban home was now the epicenter of a gruesome crime scene, surrounded by police tape and buzzing with activity. Leslie, a seasoned detective with 20 years on the force, had seen her share of horrific cases, but something about this one felt different. The brutality, the intimacy of the crime, and the mysterious note found at the scene all hinted at a deeper, darker story. As she stepped inside the house, Leslie was greeted by Officer Dan Whitaker, a young cop who looked visibly shaken. "Detective, it's bad," he muttered, leading her upstairs. The husband, Jeffrey Donovan, found her. "He's in shock, barely coherent. We've got him downstairs with a counselor." Leslie nodded, her focus already on the task at hand. She entered the bedroom, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. The chaos of the room, the blood-soaked sheets, the overturned furniture, the shattered lamp, told a story of a violent struggle. Mildred Donovan's body had already been removed, but the crime scene remained a testament to the horrors that had unfolded. Leslie moved to the nightstand, where the blood-stained note was carefully bagged and tagged as evidence. She studied it closely, the smeared words standing out. Paul. The name was unfamiliar, but it was a lead, a thread to pull on in what she suspected would be a tangled web. "Have we identified this Paul yet?" Leslie asked as she turned to Officer Whitaker. "Not yet, ma'am," he replied. "We're running a check on all of Mildred's contacts, but so far, nothing concrete." Leslie nodded thoughtfully. "What about the husband? Any history of domestic issues?" "None that we can find. Neighbors say they seemed like the perfect couple, no signs of trouble." "Perfect on the outside doesn't always mean perfect on the inside," Leslie murmured. She knew better than to take appearances at face value. "Get me everything you can on both Mildred and Jeffrey, phone records, emails, financials. I want to know who they really were." As she surveyed the room one last time, Leslie's gaze fell on Mildred's writing desk, a small corner of the room that seemed untouched by the violence. On it sat a laptop, closed but still powered on. "Have we gone through her computer yet?" "Not yet. We were waiting for your go-ahead." Leslie moved to the desk and carefully opened the laptop. The screen blinked to life, revealing a half-written document, a novel, it seemed, given Mildred's background as a writer. But it wasn't the novel that caught Leslie's attention, it was the emails and private messages popping up on the sidebar, many from someone named Paul Rivers. "Looks like we found our Paul," Leslie said, her voice tinged with grim satisfaction. "Let's dig into their communications. I want to know exactly what this relationship was and how it led to Mildred's death." The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to surface, but Leslie knew it would take more than a name to solve this case. The truth lay hidden in the shadows of Mildred's life, and she was determined to uncover it, no matter how dark or twisted it might be. Detective Leslie Roberts sat at her desk, poring over the contents of Mildred Donovan's laptop. The digital trail was a tangled mess of emails, chat logs, and drafts of romance novels, all pointing to a side of Mildred that no one had suspected. The name Paul Rivers kept surfacing, first in casual exchanges about writing, then in increasingly intimate conversations that hinted at an emotional and physical affair. The connection between Mildred and Paul wasn't just a fleeting online romance, it had grown into something much more intense and dangerous. Leslie's eyes narrowed as she read through the messages. Paul was younger, ambitious, and, according to his messages, deeply infatuated with Mildred. The tone of their conversations shifted over time, from playful banter to something darker. Paul's messages became more possessive, more insistent. He pushed Mildred to meet him in person, to make their relationship real, and when she hesitated, he grew agitated. In one of the last exchanges, Mildred had confessed her fears. "This has gone too far, Paul. I'm married. I can't do this anymore." Paul's response was chilling. "You can't just walk away, Mildred. We're meant to be together. You know that." The words sent a shiver down Leslie's spine. There was an undercurrent of obsession in Paul's messages, a desperation that could easily spiral into violence. She could see how Mildred, trapped in a life she found unfulfilling, might have been drawn to Paul's passion at first, only to realize too late that she had stepped into something she couldn't control. Leslie's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Officer Whitaker stepped in, holding a file. "Detective, we've got some background on Paul Rivers. He's a freelance writer, lives about 50 miles from here. No criminal record, but get this, he was seen in town the night of the murder. A neighbor of the Donovans spotted a man fitting his description near their house, around midnight." Leslie's pulse quickened. "Did the neighbor get a good look at him?" "Not really, just saw him from a distance." "But it's something." "It's more than something," Leslie said, a grim determination setting in. "If Paul was in town that night, we need to bring him in for questioning." As she studied the file on Paul, Leslie couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Paul's obsession with Mildred had clearly reached a dangerous peak. If he was willing to confront her in person, knowing the risks, then he might have been capable of much more. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but Leslie knew she needed to act quickly before Paul could disappear or, worse, hurt someone else. "Let's get a warrant for his arrest," she said, standing up. "I want to bring him in before he has a chance to go underground. And Whitaker, I need a deeper dive into Mildred's life. There might be other secrets we're missing, ones that could explain why she got involved with Paul in the first place." As the team sprang into action, Leslie couldn't help but feel a growing sense of urgency. Mildred's life had unraveled into a nightmare, and now it was up to Leslie to piece together the truth, before anyone else paid the price. Detective Leslie Roberts stood outside Paul Rivers' apartment, her breath misting in the cold morning air. The tension in her chest was almost palpable as she waited for the officers to return with Paul in custody. The warrant had been signed, and now it was time to confront the man who might hold the key to unraveling the mystery of Mildred Donovan's death. The door opened, and two officers emerged with Paul in handcuffs. He was younger than Leslie had imagined, mid-20s, with an unkempt appearance that contrasted sharply with the smooth-talking persona she had encountered in the messages. His eyes darted around nervously, but when he saw Leslie, he straightened, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Detective Roberts," Paul said, his voice carrying a mix of fear and defiance. "I don't know what you think I did, but I'm innocent. I loved Mildred, I would never hurt her." Leslie studied him, her gaze unwavering. "That's what we're here to find out, Paul. We have evidence that you were in town the night Mildred was murdered. Care to explain?" Paul's face paled slightly, but he held his ground. "I was there, but I didn't kill her. I went to see her, yes, but when I got to the house, I couldn't go through with it. I left before anyone saw me." "Did you speak to her?" Leslie pressed. Paul hesitated, his eyes dropping to the ground. "I tried to. I sent her a message, told her I was outside, but she didn't respond. I waited for a while, then I left. That's the truth, I swear." Leslie glanced at the officers, nodding for them to take Paul to the station. As they led him away, she turned her attention back to the scene, her mind racing. If Paul was telling the truth, then who had killed Mildred? And why was Paul so afraid? Back at the station, Leslie reviewed Paul's messages to Mildred from the night of the murder. One message stood out, sent just after midnight: "I'm outside. We need to talk. I can't let you go like this." Mildred had read it but hadn't responded. Instead, she had opened a new message thread, this one with her husband, Jeffrey Donovan. Leslie's pulse quickened as she pulled up the conversation. The messages were short, frantic, and full of fear. "Jeffrey, he's here. I don't know what to do. Please come home. I can't handle this anymore. I'm sorry. I should have told you everything. Please forgive me." The final message, sent minutes before her death, was chilling: "It's too late." Leslie leaned back in her chair, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Jeffrey had known about Paul, or at least suspected. Mildred's confession had pushed him over the edge. Leslie's thoughts were interrupted by a call from the forensic team. "Detective, we found traces of Jeffrey Donovan's DNA under Mildred's fingernails, likely from a struggle. And there's something else. The blood pattern on the note found in the bedroom doesn't match Paul's, it matches Jeffrey's." The truth was devastatingly clear. Jeffrey Donovan, the grieving husband, wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He was the killer. Now, Leslie had to bring Jeffrey to justice, to ensure that Mildred's story didn't end in vain. But as she prepared to make the arrest, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case had left scars that would never fully heal. Not for Mildred's family, not for Paul, and not for herself. Detective Leslie Roberts arrived at the Donovan residence once more, but this time, it was for a different purpose. The evidence against Jeffrey Donovan was undeniable: his DNA under Mildred's fingernails, the blood on the note, and the messages exchanged on the night of the murder. The truth was clear, and it was time to confront the man who had so carefully concealed his crime under a mask of grief. Jeffrey was in the kitchen when Leslie and her team entered, staring blankly out the window. He looked exhausted, defeated, as if the weight of his actions had finally crushed him. When he turned to see Leslie, there was no shock, no attempt to flee. He simply nodded, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. "Jeffrey Donovan," Leslie began, her voice steady, "you're under arrest for the murder of your wife, Mildred Donovan. You have the right to remain silent." Jeffrey didn't resist as the cuffs were placed around his wrists. He looked at Leslie with hollow eyes, the facade of the grieving husband completely gone. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I loved her. I just couldn't handle it anymore. The lies, the betrayal. I lost control." Leslie felt a pang of pity, but she pushed it aside. "You'll have your chance to explain in court, Jeffrey." The trial that followed was swift and intense. The prosecution painted a picture of a man driven to the edge by his wife's affair, his love twisted into possessiveness and rage. The defense tried to argue temporary insanity, claiming that Jeffrey had been pushed beyond his limits, but the evidence was too damning. Witnesses testified to the Donovans' seemingly perfect marriage, only to reveal cracks beneath the surface. Paul Rivers took the stand, his demeanor subdued, as he recounted his relationship with Mildred. He admitted to their affair but insisted that he had never intended to cause harm. Jeffrey's confession, recorded during his arrest, was played for the jury. In it, he admitted to killing Mildred in a moment of blind rage, unable to forgive her for her infidelity. The courtroom was silent as the gravity of his words sank in. In the end, the jury found Jeffrey Donovan guilty of second-degree murder. The judge handed down a life sentence, with the possibility of parole in 25 years. As Jeffrey was led away, Leslie watched him, feeling a deep sense of sorrow for everyone involved. There were no winners in this case, only shattered lives and broken dreams. Mildred was gone, Paul's life was in ruins, and Jeffrey would spend the rest of his days behind bars. With the trial over, the dust began to settle on the tragic story of Mildred Donovan's life and death. The suburban neighborhood that had once buzzed with gossip fell into a somber quiet, the house where the crime occurred now standing as a haunting reminder of what had transpired. Detective Leslie Roberts couldn't shake the weight of the case. She had solved countless crimes in her career, but this one lingered in her mind, gnawing at her. The complexities of love, betrayal, and obsession had turned a seemingly perfect life into a nightmare, and in the end, everyone involved had lost. Paul Rivers disappeared from public view, retreating into the shadows of his former life. The scandal and guilt surrounding his affair with Mildred left him a broken man. Though he hadn't been responsible for her death, the role he played in the events that led to it was undeniable. He moved away, starting over in a new town, far from the memories that haunted him. Jeffrey Donovan, now serving his life sentence, was left alone with his regrets. In the stillness of his prison cell, he replayed the night of the murder over and over, grappling with the reality of what he had done. His life, once filled with promise, was reduced to a monotonous existence behind bars, where the only thing that awaited him was time to reflect on the love he had destroyed. A Truth in Crime Case Solvers. Interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Until then, stay safe.